depressed, but if you look at Jesus, you'll feel pretty good. As Christians, and now I'm talking, the reason I said that is because I look out here, I know I'm talking to Christians. You know, we're the ones sitting here in church on Sunday morning. People who are not Christians, they don't go to, you know why people who are not Christians don't go to church? They're afraid they're going to find God there. They're afraid of God. They don't know that He's got grace for them. They don't know that He's got a gift for them. But we see Jesus. That's good. That's what we need to see, by the way. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death. That's when God so loved the world that He gave Him. You see, it said He was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death. We see Him crowned with glory and honor. Now notice this last part. That He, we're talking about grace right now, that He, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. Now what does that mean when it says, see, we're talking about grace being universal. And notice it says every man. And it doesn't mean gender-wise. It means every person. That He might taste death for every person. Well, what does that mean? Well, if we read elsewhere in the New Testament, we find out that the wages of sin... What is the wages of sin, by the way? Death. Thank you. I knew you knew that. The wages of sin is death. And then we're also told that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That word all means everybody. Did you notice guilt is universal too? That's why grace has to be universal, because guilt is universal. All have sinned. And not only that, that's in Romans 3:23. When you read that, if you read the previous verse, it says there is no difference, for all have sinned. That means we're all in the same boat. That means we can't afford to look at this person over there and say, well, I may not be perfect, but I'm better than him. It says there is no difference, for all have sinned. That's what God thinks of it. You know, if you're not perfect, then you need a perfect Savior. And we've got a perfect Savior. All have sinned, all fall short of the glory of God. The wages of sin is death. So if we're going to get what we deserve, if we're going to get the reward that we have coming, if God is going to reward us or give us what we have earned, you see, I'm making a distinction between grace, which is a gift. If God is going to reward us and give us what we've earned, and if we've sinned because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, what we deserve from God is death. That's not a very pleasant thought, but that's what we deserve. But God so loved you and me and the world that He gave Jesus. And it says that Jesus, by the grace of God, should taste death. Now see, we deserve death. Now you might not think you've done very much wrong, and that might be true. But any infraction deserves death. The wages of sin doesn't matter. Big sin, little sin, all sins in between. Doesn't make any difference. But Jesus, by the grace of God, aren't you glad for the grace of God? For His love and His free gift. Jesus, by the grace of God, should taste death for every person. That means He took what we deserve. And I like to say sometimes, Jesus took what we deserve so we can have what He deserves. And what does He deserve? Well, did you know what? Jesus is the only person who's ever lived a perfect life. Jesus is the only person who's ever fulfilled everything God requires, inside and out, up to down, back and forward, backwards and forwards, in thought and intent and in action. Jesus is the only one who's ever done that. Nobody else has fulfilled everything that God requires. Jesus was made a man so that as a man He could fulfill what God requires from man, so that all other men could believe in Him and He could be a representative or a Savior, you see, or mediator. That's why Jesus is called the mediator. That's a good thing, isn't it? Did you know that, well, I can't say all. I haven't made a comprehensive survey, but I read a lot about other cultures in the world, and I'm surprised to find out that in other belief systems and other religions and other ways of thinking, it just seems like everywhere I read, everybody has this idea of a judgment and scales, and the idea of you come up before God and He puts your good deeds in one scale and your bad deeds in the other scale, and if you've done enough good things, then you're accepted, and if you've done enough bad things, or if you've done too many bad things, then you're rejected. Everybody believes that. Did you know most Christians have that same notion? Now, what's wrong with that picture of the scales? What's wrong with that picture of the scales and your good deeds on one side and the bad deeds on the other side? What's wrong with that is there's no Jesus in that picture. It's just holy God on one side and fallen man on the other side. And I'll save you the time. You don't need to wait, like I heard one person, well, we won't know till we get up there and find out. Well, that's too late for me. I need to know something right now, see? And I'll save you the wait. If you're going to wait till you get up there and find out, I'll tell you ahead of time. Your bad deeds, see, here's the way it works. You got to be, if you're going to relate to a perfect God, and if you're going to stand before a perfect God, you've got to be perfect. Or else you've got to have a perfect Savior. Now, I've never met anybody yet who says to me, people argue with me all the time, but nobody yet has ever said, I'm perfect. I've never met that person. Nobody yet has ever said, because everybody knows they're not perfect. But what they think is, well, I may not be perfect, but I'm better than that one over there. That's why we like to have people we can point to and say, they're worse. At least they're worse than me. But listen, we're all in the same boat, you see. That's why grace is universal. That's why Jesus came. It doesn't say He came by the grace of God, taste death for, well, the top 10%. It doesn't say that. It says Jesus, by the grace of God, tasted death for everybody. That means you and me. That means He took our penalty. Now, do you know what it means when it says He tasted death for you? He took the penalty that we deserve. That means there's no more penalty left. He didn't exclude anybody. And He didn't exclude any of the penalty. He took the whole thing. There's a prophecy in the Old Testament where it talks about Him paying double. If you've ever seen that movie that Mel Gibson made about the Passion of the Christ, anybody ever seen that? Where he graphically portrays the way Jesus suffered in all of His redemptive work. You know, you watch that, that'll convince you that He paid double. That just means He paid more than was necessary to redeem you and me. So there's no more death to be paid for. And did you know, listen to this, He didn't do it just for those. He knew, of course, you know, by His foreknowledge who would be the Christians, who would believe. But He did it for those who haven't believed and who haven't yet believed. For God so loved the world, it's universal. But faith is specific. He did it for everybody. But not everybody has received it. And did you know He has wholeness and restoration and deliverance for everybody? But not everybody has received. For by grace you're saved through faith. That makes it specific. The faith is specific. I sometimes make this analogy. It's a little bit like this. Let's just say there was a natural disaster. Let's just say this area, let's just say Alva was devastated by an earthquake and by a flood and by a tornado. What else is there? A tsunami and a volcano. Let's just say everything's wiped out. A lot of natural disasters. Let's just say everybody suffered a total loss. Everything is wiped out. And let's just say the government comes in, FEMA comes in, and they set up a little headquarters, and they look around and say, whoo, man, this place is devastated. It's a total loss. So what we're going to do, now this is just fantasy. They don't really do this. But what we're going to do is we're going to write a check. I'm just making this up. I'd like to think. And we know nowadays, especially, they haven't got it. They can't be doing this anymore, I guess. I guess they've expended all their charity. But let's just say, for purposes of this little story, let's just say FEMA comes along and says, man, this is a total disaster here. Everybody here is in the same boat. Everybody is a total loss. Did you know, really, that's the perfect analogy for how we are in relation to God. You know, we don't think we're so bad, but as far as He's concerned, we're a total loss. We need total restoration from Him. So let's just say FEMA comes in and looks around, it's a total loss, and they say, here's what we're going to do, folks. We're going to set up a tent here, and we got our machine, our computer, we're going to print a check. We know who's here. We know who lives here. We've got records, and they do, by the way. We've got records. We know who's who. We're going to make a check with everybody's name on it and not leave anybody out, and it will restore to you everything you've lost. And so we make a check, and it's got every individual's name, and it's universal, it's for everybody. Now come pick up your check. You know, that's a good analogy of grace and faith. Grace means God has universally made available what He has for everybody. But not everybody has come and picked up their check. Now, if it were me, as for me, I would be down there the next day and get my check, wouldn't you? And I'd be at the bank about 5 minutes later. But you know what? Not everybody. Well, listen, let's think of it this way. Why wouldn't somebody go and pick up their check? If there was a check with your name on it, I'd be there, wouldn't you? Yeah. We're the Christians. We're sitting here. We've received what God has for us in terms of salvation. But, you know, why wouldn't a person? Let's just think about it. Well, maybe they haven't heard. That's possible. That's why we preach the gospel, by the way. You know, we don't preach the gospel in order to tell people, you need to straighten up and fly right. We preach the gospel in order to tell people, God's done something for you. Come and receive the free gift. For by grace, by a gift, Jesus loved you so much He died for you. You don't have to do anything to be right with God. You just have to receive the gift that Jesus has for you. That's what we preach to people. And then they come and receive. But you know what? Sometimes even if people hear, sometimes they don't receive because they don't believe it. Sometimes people, you know, you might say, well, there's a check down there with your name on it. A person might conceivably say, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. You know, people are like that. And then I think there's a third reason. Sometimes people are so stubborn. Have you ever met stubborn people? Why are you laughing? You're not one, are you? I've met stubborn people. Sometimes people are so stubborn, nobody's going to do anything for me. I've had people say, and I've heard this, with my own two little ears here, I've heard people say, oh, that religion stuff, that Christianity, that's just a crutch for weak people. Have you ever heard that before? Well, if it's a question before me standing before God, if it's a question of that,